Hey guys, what's up? It's AA Batteries here. Today we're going to be going over r/SupernovaRevenge. So in this video, I actually have one long story rather than multiple shorter ones. And so there will be a TLDR at the end, in case you do not want to listen. But let's just jump right into the video. So all you have to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy. Never mess with your IT guy, especially in the middle of the Iraqi desert. Next post from r/ProRevenge. This is a fairly lengthy story, and it has a pretty good payoff in the end, but I'll include a TLDR for the lazy. In 2003, I was the Director of Information Technology and Communications on a project tasked with securing Saddam's major weapons and storage sites throughout Iraq, performing a comprehensive inventory of said weapons and then destroying what we'd found. I was based at one of the largest weapons storage sites in the country, so our mission there was monumental. Blowing up 100 tons of weapons 6 days a week was going to take years. In order to accomplish this, we had to first build base defenses and secure an area the size of a small county. Once that was complete, we built a major support base in the middle of the Iraqi desert from scratch and all the infrastructure to support it. We're talking housing, cafeteria, with full commercial kitchen, office buildings, electrical, water, and sewage systems, toilet/shower trailers, recreational facilities, an 8-bay full-service vehicle shop, motor pool, and most importantly, in my opinion, IT and communication systems. Okay, story. All these facilities house bomb/explosive technicians, engineers, base support personnel, and as we had to provide our own security, private military contractors. If you're not sure what PMCs are, think Blackwater mercenaries, or look them up and you'll get a picture. Our PMCs were a mix of ex-US Special Forces, British SAS, French Foreign Legion, and ex-South African or Rhodesian Special Forces. All of them were now mercenaries, and in reality, so were the rest of us to some degree. Most of the PMCs were damn good men. But when you assemble a motley crew of individuals from such disparate backgrounds, you're bound to have a couple of bad apples in the bunch. This story is about one of those bad apples, and for the purposes of the story, we'll call this bad apple Roid Rage. RR was one of the supervisory PMCs and oversaw the night watch from 2200 to 0600, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I usually started my day around 7 a.m., and often worked until midnight. Those last few hours were generally spent surfing the internet and catching up with folks back in the US, as Iraq is 9 hours ahead. You're in the middle of the Iraqi desert, so there's not much to do other than the daily 100-ton explosion at 4 p.m. The internet is pretty much your primary source of entertainment. Since I was often in the office late at night, I was regularly alone in the office with the RR for a couple of hours. As I previously mentioned, I managed the IT/communications infrastructure for this project, and a vital component of that infrastructure were our telephones and voice-over IP phone system. All of our sites use satellite uplink to connect a central VoIP server in Baghdad, which in turn connected us to the world. You could pick up any phone and dial a 5-digit extension to connect it to any of our sites throughout Iraq, or call any international number in the world. It was a pretty sweet setup, but it was also ripe for abuse. We tried locking down international dialing with several various server rules and PIN schemes, but due to the inherent latency in satellite communications and the amount of bandwidth being consumed over a single satellite uplink at each site, we had trouble keeping those rules pushed to the phones on every desk. Ultimately, we had to scrap the restrictions as they were a real headache and went with an honor system. All international calls for business would be logged for review by the site manager each month. Anyone wanting to make a personal international call had to use their personal AT&T calling card, which they could top up online or with a credit card. After spending a few nights alone in the office with RR, I noticed a trend. RR would start his shift, check in with his men at their various positions/patrols on base, and then pick up the phone and talk in hushed tones for hours. It was a fairly large building, and our desks were opposite sides of the office, so I couldn't ever really hear or make out what he was saying. I could hear, however, this constant murmur of him speaking to somebody on the other end of the phone. It wasn't my business, however, I largely ignored him. This went on for a couple of months, and as our site manager had to return to the US for a family emergency, the phone logs went unreviewed during that time period. A couple of weeks after the site manager returned, I was summoned to the conference room for a meeting with him and our senior U.S. military and Department of Defense advisors. I could sense the tension in the room as I sat down. The site manager slid a manila folder across the table to me. As I opened the folder to reveal pages upon pages of call logs, he says, "Free Bass, we know you're usually in the office late at night and somebody's been making hundreds of international calls during that time. We've racked up thousands of dollars in phone bills. I hate to say this, but you're our prime suspect at this point, and with theft of this magnitude, we're going to have no choice but to terminate you immediately and bar you from working on any Department of Defense contracts in the future. Unless you have some evidence to the contrary, we're going to have to move forward with termination and remove you from the country on the next supply convoy." I was shocked and sat in stunned silence for a couple of seconds, then it hit me. Those calls were made by RR. Somebody hadn't been using their calling card. I immediately protested my innocence and told them that every night RR would get on the phone at the start of his shift and would still be on the phone as I left around midnight. They summoned RR to the conference room and confronted him with the records. He begrudgingly admitted it was him and began to spin some BS story about being unable to top off his calling card because his credit cards weren't working and blah blah blah. All the time, he's staring at me with eyes of the fiercest degree of rage. We were short on senior PMCs at that time, so a call was made and a decision was handed down to the RR's employer was to immediately settle the debt with the US government, and RR's salary would be withheld until he worked off the debt with his employer. RR was also put on final warning that any in future impropriety whatsoever would be met with an immediate termination and removal from Iraq, as well as being blacklisted from working in future Department of Defense contracts. For an ex-US Special Forces operator turned mercenary like RR, that would forever spell the end of the Department of Defense contracting gravy train. He didn't take this threat to his livelihood lightly. Now, any rational person would admit they messed up, tighten their game, and move on, but RR isn't a rational person by a long shot, and the events that were about to unfold would highlight his irrational and sociopathic nature. After the daily demolition at 1600, I was especially dirty, so I hurried back to the base to beat the evening rush on the shower trailer so I could grab a hot shower before the limited supply of hot water ran out. Upon entering the shower/toilet trailer, I noticed that I had the entire place to myself. I savored this rare moment of solitude, used the toilet in peace, disrobed, and stepped into a nice, much-needed hot shower. Just as I was working a nice lather of shampoo into my hair, I heard the door of the shower trailer open. Boots clomp across the floor to my shower stall, and the shower curtain is ripped off its hanger by none other than a very PO'd RR. Seething with rage, he grabbed me by my throat and yanked my wet, naked butt out of the shower and slammed me up against the opposite wall of the trailer, choking me all the while. Now I'm about 5'11" and a toned 175 pounds, but RR stands 6'4" tall and weighs about 240. He's also a steroid-enhanced, muscle-bound mass of a man. RR's grip on my throat put an ever-increasing pressure on my windpipe. In my oxygen-deprived state, I began to panic. I thrashed around trying to loosen his grip, but in doing so, I expended the limited oxygen that I had and felt myself growing weaker by the moment. RR leaned in close to my face and said, "You could think you could rat out me and there wouldn't be any consequences? Let me tell you this, Iraq is the home of a ton of unsolved mysteries, and bad stuff happens to every day to people coming out here. You better watch your back. I'm going to be coming for you at every single angle, at every single opportunity from this point forward." Just as I felt myself about to black out, he threw me to the floor and gave me a solid kick to the stomach, followed by another in the kidneys, and walked about, leaving me cold, wet, and gasping for air. I pulled myself up onto a nearby bench, caught my breath, and staggered into the shower in shock. I made my way to my quarters, sat on my bed, thought about everything that had just taken place. My immediate thought was to report him to the powers that be, but given the circumstances and that he was always armed, I had to plan my next course of action carefully. RR is a steroid-influenced individual and professional killer with his career on the line in the high-stress environment that is Iraq. My fear slowly turned into caution and then evolved into anger. Yes, I'd have to plan my next course of action and ultimate revenge very carefully. For the time being, I decided against reporting him and riding on any convoys that he was on. I'd been procrastinating setting up a private Wi-Fi network connection to my trailer, but I wasn't going to be caught dead spending any late nights alone in the office with RR in the near future, so I got it set up that night. The next night, I left my trailer to use the bathroom. As I passed the office on my way to the room, I saw R sitting by his desk by the window on the phone. Why is this guy on the phone all the time, and who's he talking to? Time to investigate. Investigation. I don't want to get off in the weeds in technical jargon, so I'll try and keep this as brief and as simple as possible so you can comprehend my next course of action. All of our phones at our site were voice-over phones and connected to the local network, which was connected to our satellite uplink. Every phone has a unique MAC address, a fingerprint if you will, which identifies it on the network. I had a master list of all devices and phones connected to the network so I could easily identify the phone RR used every night. Network Instruments makes a nice little program called Observer, which allows you to monitor all traffic on the network. It even has a cool little feature where you can flag a phone's MAC address, tell it to automatically begin capturing traffic on the phone from that moment the phone makes the call until the end of the call. Once the call is complete, it dumps the entire phone call into an audio file, which then you can play back at your leisure. Pretty neat. Time to observe. Analysis. Over the next month, I amassed hours and hours of calls that RR made, and I finally found out who he was talking to. We already knew RR is a huge piece of trash, but the conversations I listened to took it to a whole new level. I sat at my desk every day with my headphones in pretending to be listening to music, but in reality, I was digesting each and every call, taking notes and marking time steps and all the good stuff. Here's what I found. RR is married and has 3 kids. RR also has a mistress in the US who is a stripper, and by the sounds of it, she's a world-class gold digger. RR spoke to his wife and kids about twice a week on average, but always kept the conversations brief because he was busy running the show in a very dangerous Iraq. As soon as RR would hang up with his family, he'd immediately call his mistress. Let's call her SM. RR made a point to call and talk to SM for hours every night. However, a douche has to have priorities right. Most of the conversations were pretty nasty phone sex, but others were sprinkled in with bits of gold like, hey, the next time... No. We're just gonna skip to the end of this. I'm going to divorce her and marry you, promise. Another memorable conversation included RR calling his wife and telling her that he'd have to cut his next vacation leave to the US short because he was so critical of the operations in Iraq and he wouldn't be able to run the place without him. This conversation was followed by an immediate call to SM telling her, yeah, the old lady bought the storybook line and sinker. Yeah, I told you, she's dumb. Yeah, I'll book the tickets, and this time we're going to Paris. We're going to do it big. While these conversations were certainly deplorable, other conversations with SM were more dangerous in nature and severe violations of operational security. Given RR's foul nature, I kinda understand why I felt it to brag about operations, but man, you're talking to your mistress in the US who has no idea about any of this Iraq stuff anyways. Make up stuff if you must, but don't actually discuss the specifics of our operations and movements to inflate your pathetic ego. Some of the calls went like this. Yeah, I'm on the convoy commander tomorrow. Yep, large in charge. I'm running a 20-vehicle convoy of flatbed trucks loaded with big missiles from different towns to different towns tomorrow morning at 0900, and all 40 guys on the convoy report to me. These missiles are pretty volatile and sensitive. We'd be a prime target for the bad guys, so I came up with a plan to cover everything with these huge canvas tents we stole from Towelhead. It's not very nice. So we can disguise everything. Hell yeah, I'm smart. This is just one of the many calls of this nature, and the growing frequency of this calls ultimately forced to cut my investigation short and just move to the next phase of my plan. Phase 1 action. I started studying RR's movements and convoys he was on and what they were doing. If I was going to pull this off, I'd be at a pretty spot on with my timing. I edited all the calls down to the good stuff and burned 2 CDs for 2 different audiences. RR ran a weekly supply convoy, and one of these CDs needed to be shipped to the US within a week's time. The only way to make that happen was to drop them off at to DHL at the international airport. They always stop by there on their way back to our site to pick up beer and booze at duty free. So I packaged up 1 CD and asked a buddy on the convoy to drop it off at DHL for me, and I told him I'd pay him back when he returned. Once the convoy returned to our base, my buddy handed me the receipt and tracking information. Done. Phase 1 is complete, now it's time for Phase 2. The following week, I packaged up the other CD and asked the same buddy on the supply convoy to drop that off at the Department of Defense County Director's office at the project's headquarters. By this time, the first CD was out for delivery in the US, and the second CD was about to be delivered at the HQ in 4 hours. Perfect. Not to pat myself on the back, but the disaster that was about to unfold for RR was the product of patience, dedication, meticulous planning, and flawless execution. The convoy made its way to the city, and the second CD was delivered to headquarters. RR made the usual pass by the airport for booze run and then returned later that night. Reaction. The following morning, the entire base awoke to an unusual sound. The unmistakable sound of the whirring of helicopter blades. The only time we ever had a chopper land was a medevac, which was for one of our local Iraqi ammo handlers who thought an empty weapons bucket would be a good place to on his lunch break. That didn't go over so well, and he ended up being bitten by a viper. That's another story for another time, though. So this Black Hawk helicopter with overhead Apache escorts lands on these guys, come running out asking for RR and the head of the PMC at our base. They unceremoniously roused RR out of bed, along with the head of security, and told them they needed to leave immediately. With just the clothes on their back and their body armor, they were whisked away within minutes. As soon as they left, the camp manager approached me and said we needed to have a chat in the conference room. We made our way to the conference room and got on a call with our local Department of Defense advisors and the Department of Defense County Director. He listened to the CD and wanted to commend me for blowing the whistle on RR. He also scolded me a bit for not blowing the whistle sooner on the first violation of Operation Security I had heard. But when I told him the entire story and the brutal assault I endured at the hands of RR in the bathroom, he softened his tone a bit. He concluded the call with assurances that RR would be dealt with swiftly and thanked me for my vigilance. Fallout. What follows was replayed by me to the head of security who traveled with RR on the helicopter to the city. Upon arrival at the helipad at headquarters, a U.S. Army security detail led the two individuals into the Department of Defense Country Director's office, and RR was confronted with the evidence. The director sat there with the senior advisors present, played the entire CD in front of RR and his supervisor. It was a heated one-sided conversation, and RR got ripped up one side down the other. He was ordered to leave the country immediately and would be taken under escort to the U.S. Air Force terminal at the International Airport upon conclusion of the meeting. He's also notified that he would no longer be eligible to work Department of Defense contracts in the future. The head of the PMC was also excoriated for allowing this behavior to happen on his watch, and notified that their security company would now be under investigation for any other possible violations. If the investigation unearthed any additional violations, they'd be found in breach of contract, which would be terminated upon transition to a new PMC company. That company lasted another 7 months in Iraq. As RR left the meeting under escort, the director turned to him and said, "And tell your wife to stop calling here and blowing up the phones. She's mad about something, but that's your problem to deal with. You need to call her when you get to the airport and tell her to knock that off." Moral of the story: don't mess with your IT guy. TLDR. Some knuckle-dragging, roid-raging, meathead merc abused our phone system in Iraq and ran up thousands in phone bills. When I was questioned under suspicion, I told the powers that it wasn't me, but it was in fact DD. Meathead merc assaulted me in the shower, choked me out, and thus began our journey of sweet, sweet revenge. Got dirt on him and sent it to his wife, and sent it to the other dirt to the HQ. He immediately fired and ejected him from Iraq, as well as blacklisted him from ever working in a Department of Defense contract again. I want to thank you guys for watching. I don't want to keep this video too long because it's already pretty long already, but I really love that story, and I was entertained the entire time just reading it for you guys. So if you enjoyed, please make sure to tell me, and I'll see you guys again very, very soon.